Someone asked me how many hours meditation I do every day. It's my favorite question. I've spoken about meditation, this word meditation, and to you, and how problematic, somewhat problematic. I think partly I haven't quite resolved the issue, but I feel, like it's become quite a major industry really, and people are suddenly very interested about the word, to the extent that I really, also raises some questions in my mind, certainly. What actually it means. Like my question would be, where does this word fit in the Eightfold Path? Is Sammaditthi, is that meditation? Or Sammasankappa, is that meditation? Sammawacha, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, is that meditation? Or is it right effort? Or sati, samadhi, which one is that meditation or not meditation? And the definition is quite flexible actually. I think, like, to this person, when I told him how many hours I spent working on my translation on the computer, he thought that wasn't meditation. So that seems apparently not. So then he said, well, he wanted to pin me down. So how many hours do I sit cross-legged? That was really the question. And as if sitting cross-legged is meditation, let's not dispute it, but admittedly, if you sitting cross-legged with a mind full of hindrances wouldn't count really as meditation, would it? Like, sitting 2 hours thinking about your old girlfriend it's just sitting cross-legged, isn't it? Or sitting nodding as a practice. Some places they recommend sitting for long periods, and many people just fall to sleep. And that's, it's certainly, I think everyone would agree that to call that meditation would be certainly a very generous use of that term, to sit cross-legged, worrying about your, some problem or other. But I wouldn't just dismiss it, because sometimes these can be opportunities to learn. It's not, is that meditation or not? Sometimes you sit with a problem and then that can be quite, the result of it can be skillful. I think there's a sort of insecurity about it. Sometimes I think people want a system, like they want like ABC, and then they're sure that they're meditating because someone told them. And you can even pay money for it. Like, you can pay money for a special, like when I was a teenager, I got a mantra, and I paid money for it, real money, for a special student rate actually. But I got a special word, and I promised I wouldn't tell anyone. But I wouldn't, on reflection, have paid any money for that word at all. Because that's not really. But I think it fosters the idea that there's some technique, and if you can maybe if you paid a lot of money, you would feel probably more certain that you finally had cracked what this word really means. So it's a question I've been kind of asking, and I think you must ask yourselves what it means. And the first question I would ask, is it good? Is meditation a good thing? Is it good to, like, if I said I meditated for 4 hours a day, would that be good? Well, how would you answer that question actually? I say to you, how many hours do you meditate? And you say 2 hours. Oh, no, 2 hours. I meditate for 4 hours. That sounds like twice as good, doesn't it? Sounds like you're just a lay person, so it's sort of forgivable that you only meditate for such a short period. But there's always the assumption, isn't it, that meditation is basically good, and the more you do, the better it is. But what do you think? Like, how would you answer the question? Like, in terms of, what's your attitude? Because I think it's maybe worth it's worth answering this properly, really. Like what you know, because it's better, you know, to say consider that word. What's good about meditation? What would be a good aspect, and what would be less good? How should you really phrase the question? Actually, like instead of asking someone, "Can you meditate? Do you meditate? Are you a meditator?" I heard a Buddhist monk actually. Someone told me he said that he taught meditation, but he himself did not meditate. That's an interesting combination, isn't it? I teach meditation, but I myself do not meditate. You know, so it's like he's assumed that he doesn't sit cross-legged, therefore he doesn't meditate. You know, so he's using that definition, and yet what he does, it's just the way the word is used in a sort of very haphazard way. And always the assumption is that it's a good thing to meditate, and if you don't meditate, that's no good. You know, then you say, well, what? You know, like consider the postures of meditation as sitting, we've talked about. Then there's also walking. So we have to include walking in that word. Walking, then standing. You could say, yes, standing. You'd maybe stand under a tree or something. We'd have to, maybe, popular assumption that might be. Lying down could be, you know. I think if your mind is free of hindrances is always a good thing. Like if your mind is free of greed, hatred and delusion, then that would be a skillful mental state, wouldn't it? And that you'd say but I think meditation includes a special posture very often. It's not, you could expand it to say when you're giving a desana at Damrivi, that's part of meditation. It's up to you. You know, it's like the actual word. Maybe it is, it's your definition. It's how usually people wouldn't say this is meditation, like what you're doing, sitting, listening to a talk. It's not really, you're not really meditating, really, and I'm not really meditating either. You know, is that good then? Is it good not to meditate? You see, because then it raises a question. Maybe it's better sometimes not to meditate, is it? Or should you meditate as many and just shouldn't do any not meditation? And if you consider the great moments in a person's life, like Sariputta fanning the Buddha, he wasn't meditating, was he? He was fanning the Buddha. You couldn't count that moment of enlightenment. So that makes you wonder, well, that didn't happen in a moment of formal meditation. Was that good or bad? Or, so like meditation, you can't really exalt it to that extent. If someone can achieve great progress in a moment of apparent non-meditation, it puts this so-called meditation into perspective, doesn't it? I mean, it might have a place, but you couldn't raise it above the rest of the Eightfold Path. I mean, it has a place. I think sometimes people maybe are not so keen on keeping precepts, say, but they're keen on meditation. There I find perplexing, isn't it? It's sort of something in the wrong context. Or Ananda, remember, getting into bed. I mean, he's sort of given up his walking meditation, about to go to bed, and before his head hits the pillow, he's enlightened, arahant. How did that happen? That should have happened half an hour ago when you were sitting and walking. One day. It shouldn't have happened at this moment of non-meditation, you see. So, it has a use and a purpose, but it's I couldn't distinctly say it's better to meditate or you should meditate as long as you can. It's not. I think it's the wrong question, really. For me, like to ask me how long I meditate seems the wrong question. Or to say that you don't meditate but you just teach meditation, that seems like it's not. It sort of misses the point, really, of somehow what I've been trying to explain in some of the sessions. Really, it's been it's part of the underlying theme of these talks has been this kind of investigation, trying to expand the use of this term, to show the variety of it. And I think part of it is to work with your own, like each of us has our own personality also. Like sometimes you see people trying to copy some other person and it hurts them, and it's unhelpful. They try to be like some model, like this Buddha Rupa, you think, well, that's what we all have to be like. We all have to sit. It's like a model. I've noticed you're not doing it, but I'm doing it. Then you think, well, that's the Buddha Rupa and Bhante Varado, where we all have to do it. But that's not that's not, to me, that's the wrong. It's the wrong attitude to copy. To think, but it would make you feel secure, wouldn't you? Like every time you see a Buddha, either he's sitting very beautifully, or walking, some lying down, sometimes standing, usually with his hand in a special position. So you begin to copy, so that you. But I think that's the wrong. Like, to copy, that's the wrong attitude. It's not. You're not really getting to the heart of it. I think that the question you should, for me, is thinking, rather than asking how many hours you meditate, I think there might be because that tends towards competition and insecurity. Am I better than you? Or how well are you getting on? How well are you really practicing as a monk? Are you really a monk? I mean, if you don't meditate, I mean, heavens. But a better question would be, like, how many hours do you practice kusala? How many hours do you practice akusala? That seems a much more helpful question, actually. If I asked you how many hours do you cultivate kusala, that's actually quite good for you, isn't it? It would really, if I asked you how many hours you meditate, it would be quite a sort of an aggressive question, competitive, and not very particularly useful, because the word is so undefined and loose in a way. But if I say, how many hours do you cultivate what's kusala? It's like a rhetorical, it's not even asking for a time. I practice half an hour, because it's not that kind of question. But it's certainly a thought-provoking question, isn't it? And actually much more flexible and useful. And maybe we could each of us ask ourselves that. How many hours do we practice kusala kamma? How many hours do we practice akusala kamma? Because when you look in those terms, then you include all those moments that Sariputta was standing, apparently not meditating, fanning the Buddha. That's kusala kamma, listening diligently with a skillful mental state. Then it's a much more helpful question, actually. And then you see the flexibility, and there's no obligation to do any particular thing. I mean, it's like, for those with an obsession for meditation, often that can be akusala. Often it can be unhelpful. It's not really answering the question. It's not, because life has there's many demands, and surely the right attitude is to respond to those demands in a kusala fashion, to the opportunities. We have business to do. I mean, if you're always obsessed about sitting under a tree quietly, that would distract from fulfilling one's duties. Say, fanning the Buddha, and so on, or the body's demands, needing to go to bed. That's all of it. But it's following. To me, that's a much more helpful attitude, is to pursue what is kusala. By body, by speech, and by mind, all of that, and to sort of examine that way. I find that a much more helpful question, actually. A lot of the fruits of practice really, arise from being in the right situation. Somehow the situation very often has a very powerful effect. And for me, that was, particularly apparent, say, when I first went and stayed at Damrivi in England. I went to join this monastery, and I had meditated for many years, actually, attempting to fulfill a duty. I used to people say you have to try and meditate for 10 minutes a day. That was common advice, and then maybe you can increase it and try and do 15 minutes. I thought, well, that's good. And it was seemed sensible, that attitude, but then it became boring and not very, just sitting, and for what reason I didn't know. I didn't see any result or purpose. It seemed like good advice, but it was always a slight struggle. It was always me sitting, in environments which were not particularly conducive, trying to fulfill a lifestyle, or trying to find something, I didn't know what. What I found when I went to Damrivi is that, living in a monastic environment with my teacher, Ajahn Sumedho, I found it was incredible effects. Then it was, what I found was, what happened then was much more automatic. The changes that could take place were not particularly through my personal efforts, but by living in that environment. It was what happened. Admittedly, there was a place for personal effort, but a lot of the changes that happened were automatic. You live with good people and get good advice, and then I found that very helpful. And at that time, still worrying, I would worry a lot about whether I was making good progress or not. And it's quite and working with these, like, worry, am I making progress? What I found very helpful at that time was, instead of worrying about my practice, was what I noticed was when I engaged in periods where I was helping other people or helping the community, at those times I noticed I was completely free of worry. I found that was lovely, to see. You could worry about your meditation, then try and sit and meditate, and all the time worrying about your meditation while you're apparently. But then you get up and get a broom and sweep, or do something to clean the carpet. Suddenly your mind's free of worry. I thought, well, that's a lovely way to free yourself of worry, isn't it? And that's kusala. Surely that's kusala. It's kusala to consider other people. I used to think, well, it seemed quite unlikely I personally could ever get enlightened. Heard about this wonderful experience, and began to seem, the harder I tried, the further it seemed to get the goal. So I thought, well, maybe I could help other people to get enlightened. Maybe that would be maybe I could, personally can't do it, maybe other people could do it. So that attitude also was helpful, just helping other people get enlightened. It seemed to it brought me more happiness, actually. Recommend it as an attitude rather than worrying about yourself. What you note, if you did, there are some very incredible, lovely what should we call meditations there, or kusala kamma at least, wholesome, like, practices, helpful, very helpful, and lovely reflections, which I tried to translate as best I could. Did you use any of that? This session was, what I thought with this session was, I felt so remorseful, not remorseful, but something like that. I thought, this session I'm going to do meditation with you, and I thought, we'll sit. And then as the day went on, I thought, I would like to talk to you a bit more. If you do, like, from time to time, remember these beautiful words, you'll find it brings, like, it's like a moment of happiness, actually. Like, like this, like the news, you can be so worrying and depressing, and actually, consider is that kusala, is that wholesome or skillful? Does it have a good result? Maybe as a monk I can get away with it, but not. Can't read the newspapers. I get almost no news at all, and actually it's wonderful. I knew a monk in Thailand, a young monk. He said, and he's same position as I'm in actually, and he said the whole of the Second Iraq War, and he didn't even know about it. That's incredible, isn't it? And and a friend I know in England, a layperson, he's a Christian person and very interested in the problems of Palestine, and he goes and visits, and used to email me from time to time. I think he stopped. But I recommended to him also not to pick up the news, just stop learning. That advice wasn't very well received, I think, by him. Simply because it's exhausting, and it invites you into other people's problems in a way which is questionable to my mind. It's not. There's very often very little you can do with that situation. But I think each of us has to answer this for ourselves. What's your particular duty? Is it your duty to find out what's going on in the world? You have a life. You have a lifespan which might maybe 80 years. Admittedly, it may be much, much less. It might be, that's true. And then within that time, each of us has a duty to fulfill and a potential, not just for ourselves, but also the example that we set to others. Like what would it be like for me if I told you not to read newspapers, but then I was, I say, yeah, but I'm the teacher, you shouldn't, you're the student, you shouldn't. It's all right for me because I have to find out. And it's part of it is simply example you're setting to others. I think maybe people worry about being ignorant. They've got this word ignorant, but what does the word ignorant mean really? These kind of words, really what does it mean being ignorant of what the capital city of French Guiana is? Or is that ignorance? Or is it ignorance simply not to know about the Four Noble Truths? Or the word cultured, what does cultured mean? Does it mean that you know the Mozart symphonies? Often that word has been bandied around. Or does cultured mean that you've got very good samadhi? Like the people in this country, lay people have got very good samadhi. I mean, I find that, they might live in a mud hut. Maybe they can't read or write, but if they've got very good samadhi, I mean, that's incredible. If you can get fourth jhana, some people can, some lay people can. How is that not uncultured? I mean, I find that immensely. I mean, that's surely the key to that term. Someone who keeps the precepts. One common reflection the Buddha gave, and I suppose I wanted to talk a little bit about mindfulness of breathing with you. I might come back to those sheets later, but like in terms of like the definition of samadhi, often as I know it's defined as the four jhanas in some places. Elsewhere, it's defined differently, but samadhi, one of the key aspects is to have a mind free of the defilements, the greed and the hatred and the worry and the doubt and the whatever the other one is, drowsiness. One aspect of samadhi, and which I recommend to you, is and the Buddha in general recommended practices which were free of thought, like you've got like samadhi with thought and samadhi without thought. And thought can often be very painful and difficult, can't it? Like thought is often something that people in meditation, it can become very prominent and invasive, really, difficult, problematic. And how do you, like the question, how would you cut off thought? How do you deal with thought as a what's the answer to that? Like, would you like to, is that a problem? Maybe it's for some of you very good meditators, I don't know. But certainly the Buddha, if I, could just quote the Buddha, he recommended to Megya. Megya was the one that went off, even though the Buddha asked him to stay. He said, no, I've really got to go and meditate. He said, I've got to go and meditate one day. I found this incredible mango grove. And he says, the Buddha's, he's twice said, no, just could you stay here with me? There's no one else, just you and me. And eventually he kept pestering the Buddha, so the Buddha said, well, you keep talking about striving. Why don't you go and strive? So he went to the mango grove, and he was astounded in this lovely place, how full of defilement his mind was. So he went back to the Buddha and confessed what was happening. He said, here am I, a monk gone forth, and gone to this lovely grove, and my mind's full of greed and hatred and delusion. But it's, the intention is very good. I mean, it's not particularly to blame him, because it's quite wholesome. It's just quite surprising, and a good result was that the Buddha gave him a lovely reflection. He didn't scold him and said, "See, you shouldn't have gone off. You should have looked after me instead of kept thinking about yourself." No, he could have said that, but there was no scolding in it actually. He just gave him a lovely reflection on like good friendship, like cultivating. That's quite a good way actually. It's like cultivate. What does that mean? Just incidentally, like good friendship. Does that mean you know their telephone number or something? I've got a good lot of telephone numbers. What's the key principle of friendship, do you think? Like if someone, could you be a good friend? Could the Buddha be your good friend, say? He's parinibbana, many thousands. Could that be your good friend? Or some particular monk, say, who's dead? Could that be your good friend? Or could it be your bad friend even? Like, could someone be your bad friend? But the key to it, what's the key to Kalyana Mitta or Papa Mitta? If you have children and they're getting into relationships which are harming them, and they're very often very obviously enjoyable. I mean, this is the search for pleasure can often lead you into very unwholesome states. But the key to it, isn't it, is of influence. It's like having good influences, or it's like not only a good influence, but being fortunate enough to raise that up, to remember the Buddha's life, and that becomes he then can be a Kalyana Mitta, in the sense that he has a prominence in each of our lives. That becomes Kalyana Mitta, good friendship. Simply by remembering, not knowing, not being able to speak or not having to, but just remembering what they said, their conduct, their example. That's the point of it, isn't it? It's not that you need to talk to them particularly, but good friendship means good influence. And admittedly, if you get into conversation with people, and that can... But the point of that is in terms of the influence it has on you, and that can be good for good or for evil, and it can often be unknowing. That's the worst of it, is where it's that you're simply unaware of the influence someone has on you, the harmful influence of someone, often charismatic. Charismatic people can carry a lot of people with them, for upwards or downwards. Saddam Hussein, how many people did he pull into his trap? A very extremely unskillful, influence, and yet very powerful because of the charm, and he must have had a lot of ability to do. Some people have a power to do that, and then the like the duty of what's necessary for humans is to recognize what's kusala and what's kalyana mitta and what's papa mitta. It's not what's fun. I'm not saying this is fun or not. It's not to do with whether it's scintillating company and tell a lot of good jokes and drink good whiskey. He's my kalyana mitta. He drinks really good cognac. Kalyana mitta according to what booze they drink. But there's not, the papa mitta. I've heard Sri Lankan, you're very lucky actually, your culture, you've got some lovely sayings. Not sure if you've heard all the sayings that I've heard. I've got snippets. I heard one Sri Lankan saying is that the devil is not as black as you think. Do you know what that means? The devil is not as black as you think. Sometimes the devil can look quite attractive, quite a charming bloke. Managing director of a top company. You wouldn't think that's the devil, would you? The devil, he's nice. He says good morning in a very nice way. You say the devil's not as black as you think. So it means you have to be, not driven by simple attraction, because that's the way. That's even animals are driven by that. So you can trap animals, can't you? Put a cheese in a trap, and that's a lovely bit of cheese. And I think most humans think a bit like that too, don't they? You think that's a lovely bit of cheese, put my head in that, bang. And in some traps you can learn. Some traps they're humane, they don't kill you. So you go into the trap and then you're let out. But these animals you have to let far away, because these are the ones that will remember that that's the trap. Some traps, they don't give you a second chance. They come down, break your neck. And that's the terrible trap, isn't it? And humans can often get into a situation from which they will not learn. Then it's not. You don't learn. They happen too quickly. They're too disastrous. And maybe all of us, hopefully, manage to get into traps that we can learn from. But to recognise the difference between pleasure and kalyana, the difference between pain and papa. And sometimes. And that lovely reflection I gave from Sakka. Sakka asked the Buddha, I talked about this long word, papancha sanya sanka, like I used the word fictitious perceptions and conceptions for that translation. And Sakka, the god, asked the Buddha, this was his first occasion of visiting. This was before he became a Sotapanna, actually. He was slightly more diffident and humble. He was always, you couldn't. He's very exuberant. And the next time, but this time he was. And then he asked the Buddha about how do you overcome this, and then the Buddha said that I think I have to, maybe if am I allowed to look at this, or do I have to remember it? He talked about, I think, the 3 types of karma. Am I right? But it's, better check this. I almost know it. You've got to acknowledge that I almost know it. So then the Buddha said this happiness, sorrow, and what I call neutrality, upekkha. And of each of these are each of 2 types, a type which should be cultivated and a type that should not. It's interesting, is it? This means that there are certain types of happiness that should be cultivated, but there are certain types of sorrow that should also be cultivated. So it's not to do with whether something's happy or not. It's to do with what? When one knows of any happiness, sorrow, or neutrality, that in cultivating it, unwholesome states increase and wholesome states decline, it should not be pursued. This is a happiness that's unwholesome, a sorrow which is unwholesome, a neutrality which is unwholesome, then should not be pursued. Or if wholesome states increase and unwholesome states decline, it should not be pursued. This practice leads to the cessation of these fictitious inner perceptions and conceptions. That's incredible, isn't it? Like, there's no obvious connection, is there, between that? But the Buddha's sort of saying, and I felt in quite a brilliant way, like to answer that question of thought. How do you deal with thought? It's a much more rounded answer in terms of what's kusala. It's a much more helpful way of examining it. How do you live your life? It's like that. How do I overcome the problems of my mind? And the Buddha says, how do you live your life? Do you practice anapanasati? I suppose you do. There are many different ways of teaching it. And big arguments. Which one's the best? Worldwide, this has been going on for a long time. I suppose you know about these arguments, do you? I got wind of them a bit. Some people say you've got to watch your belly. That's the big thing. That's the important. And others say, no, that's utterly wrong. That's vipassana. So we're talking, you've got to watch your nose. That's the big thing. And other people say, well, it doesn't really matter. You just watch wherever you like. I think that's the Ajahn Brahm. He's the sort of, what's the word? Peacemaker. It's a kind of peaceful position, not to take a position. But in some ways that's quite a good answer, really. It's like what, it's like, why don't you find out for yourself? Then people feel insecure, but how can I find out? You must tell me. Are you watching your breath, or are you just waiting? I guess you're just waiting. This is the danger, really, of being a student, and it's really, in some ways, not particularly what I wanted for you, to be so far below me, and me so far high up above you. And what happens in this relationship is you become very passive, and I take, and it's in some ways good. It has a place, but in some ways, what's nice also, time to time, is for you to teach and to tell others what to do, like that. And if you do that, or if you ever get an opportunity to give talks at, say, Damrivi or some other place, then take it, even though it's difficult, because it's helpful for your development in many ways, to take that burden in a way. It's good for you. For me to ask you, how do you practice? Would you like to tell the group how you practice mindfulness of breathing? Would you like to lead this session, one of you? Would you like to come up? And I haven't yet said a word. I've just introduced the subject. Maybe you could come up and tell people how would you practice. It's part of your duty, really, is to explain Dhamma, isn't it? I had part of this lovely conversation yesterday after we'd finished how many hours I meditate. We went on to the topic of teaching others, and there's a sort of school of thought which goes that until you're enlightened, you may as well not open your mouth. I think it's fairly irresponsible unless you're enlightened. And then it sort of comes down to, you more or less, never mind that, it's more or less Just you say what the Buddha said. It's don't say, if you say anything else than that, that's pretty dubious. But this, that's, it has a, it's. I find that it might have a value, but it's stifling and it's untrue actually, even in the suttas, where for instance, monks would give an explanation to an answer in their own way. Having done that, they would go to the Buddha and say, "Did what I say was that right or not?" They'd taken the duty of saying so, explaining in some way. And that's, and I think it's right. Like when the Arahant Asaji explained Dhamma to Sariputta, he said, "Look, I don't know this teaching very fully," or something. I can't remember the exact word he used, but he did it with some caution, even as an Arahant. But he did it in a very, very brilliant way. And then Sariputta, as a Sotapanna, explained to Moggallana as a Sotapanna. And Moggallana was a Sotapanna then from that. So does that mean you have to be a Sotapanna before you open your mouth? What's the answer to that question, really, would you think? How would you answer that? I mean, what is it? Could you answer it via my lovely Ambalatika Rahula Wada Sutra? Is it kusala? What you're about to say, is it kusala or akusala? Surely that's what that sutta is about. It's not whether you're a Sotapanna or not. It's to do, is it harmful or not, what you're about to say? That's the question that the Buddha gave to Rahula. He said, what is a mirror for? King adasoti, what is a mirror for? It's for reflection, Bhante. In the same way, acts of body, speech and mind should be with continual reflection. And to, take the opportunity, I think, from time to time to teach people a little bit. It can be very lovely and helpful and good for you. It's all right losing a chance, but just recognise it. It's interesting to notice how much time we waste, really, isn't it? You can just think and your mind goes drifting off. But that time could be used in another way also, to remember, I've had this, I was using these reflections, all beings must not be harmed. I was using that reflection in the last 2 weeks, a very, very lovely reflection. All beings must not be harmed, all beings must not be harmed. It's lovely, lovely. Keep saying that. It's very enjoyable, actually. You can say it kind of slowly, you can say it fast, or you say it very mindfully and kind of slowly. Really, you kind of listen to it. So you're not just saying it, but you listen to each thought. As you say it, you kind of listen to it. So it's very, very, very beautiful. It's very nice. Recommend it. It'd be quite a good meditation. Okay, I'm about to teach. You ready? Okay, when you breathe in, it's a very easy system, this. You say, you think, I breathe in. And then when you breathe out, you think, I breathe out. How are you getting on? Are you still remembering what I just told you? It's funny how quickly you can forget, isn't it? You could tell people and they remember for a second and then they lost it. Okay, so when you breathe in, I breathe in. I breathe out. You have to learn to be a little strict. It's like a kind of skill, really, of you just determined that this is what you will do with your mind. And then your mind might decide you want to do something else, but you have to kind of be very firm for a bit. This is what we're going to do. It's a kind of skill of just learning to be firm with this monster that keeps re-arising. this might not work for you, then we have to do metta meditation. We'll go back to metta, but just try this. I'm not saying this is your path or your meditation, but I'm just, I have to say something, and it might not be exactly what you need to hear, but this is what we're going to do anyway, and then see. It might be quite good. Can you decide to think this? Have you still, I'm not sure, maybe you're worrying about something's happening in India or something, I don't know. Or can you just decide this is what you will do? I breathe in, I breathe out. But I want you to, this way I'm teaching is different. It's the new system where you put your attention on the thought, right? The main attention. I'm not saying, you're completely unaware of your body or something, but could you just try this with your attention on the thought? The Buddha said, you see, that this system is a way of cutting off thought. And it's interesting if you do this particular way, I find it's actually quite immediate and true and obvious that this system of I breathe in, I breathe out actually does indeed cut off thought, doesn't it? You say I breathe in, and then there's a space, isn't there? And that's truly a space. It's not, and then I breathe out, and then you see there's just those words. The rest of the mind is actually quite clear and free of thought, isn't it? So to that degree, you could say this is quite a good system, isn't it? When you're doing this, it does indeed cut off thought. Interesting, isn't it? So this is mindfulness of thought, right? We're going step by step. I don't know if it's considered part of Buddhism to be mindful like this, but this is what we'll do for now. Mindfulness of thought is to use your mind, your manos, whatever it is, your thinking faculty mindfully. So you can, it's to use thought. I breathe in. I breathe out. It's a mindfulness practice, isn't it? I find it quite comforting for some reason. Do you find it comforting to do that? What is your thought like? Is it when you think that, is it kind of got a nice tone to it, your thought? Or is it kind of like an aggressive thought? I mean, I'm not sure because I'm not in your head, so I don't know, but I guess it must make a difference. But if you could think it in a gentle and nice way, obviously that would be what's it, head start, would be an advantage. I breathe in, I breathe out. I breathe in, I breathe out. And then you see, I don't know what you're going to see now actually, maybe tell me later. What happens? Does your mind go a little bit peaceful? Does it? You could have paid for this. You could have paid hard money for this. You got this for free. I could have charged you $1,000. Then you'd pay attention. No messing about. You'd be up at 3 in the morning doing this, getting your money's worth. Say it's free. Oh, I'll take it. Yeah, quick go then. So now the next question I have to ask you is like in your body, where do you experience that thought as a matter of interest? Is it like when you think that thought, do you experience it in your head? Does it have like a general place? I mean, just as a matter of interest, do you notice that? I'm told the Chinese, when you ask them where they think, they say it's in their belly. They point to their stomach. And I think Westerners generally point to their head. I'm not sure where you point. I think some people, I can't remember which one, but they point to their chest. I think maybe thighs or something. Quite a good indication where people are at, isn't it? Where do you think? Anyway. It's quite interesting to notice where actually, but you can just incorporate that. That's where this sort of inner voice appears. I breathe in, I breathe out. How are you getting on? Are you tired of this already? You notice when you stop doing it, then thought comes rushing back, doesn't it? As long as you're doing it, that's cutting off thought. It's going in your head, isn't it? Is it? Or is it your throat or something? Is it kusala this? Is this harmful, this meditation? Or is it harmless? Does it harm you? Or does it harm other people? I mean, this you have to answer. If it makes you drowsy, that would be a disadvantage, wouldn't it? You'd have to admit that would raise some doubts about whether it was exactly the right thing to be doing at this very moment. You know, maybe you should practice metta meditation, maybe be well, something like that, I don't know. This you have to, part of the skill of it really, and the confidence to know, you know, what works for you. So have a kind of flexibility. And we'll continue with this lovely meditation. I breathe in, I breathe out, I breathe in, I breathe out. It can be developed. There's a whole, in the Samyutta Nikaya, there's a whole chapter on this. It's incredible, like the ways, you know, like the words that the Buddha spoke about mindfulness of breathing, like what he claimed you could achieve from it. And he himself, he called it the Tathagata's abiding, the abiding of the Tathagata, this. It's extremely exalted meditation. And I think what's particularly kind of brilliant is that the way the Buddha could use it in many different ways. Like it, I must say, in ways that you often don't hear very many monks talking about even. Like the Buddha, he stressed the 16 sort of stages or 16 different approaches to this meditation. So it's, you know, it's like you know, what I've done so far is very, very simple. It's just, you know, I don't know what step it is, but it's, you know, at least it might be the first rung of the ladder, but just think what, you know, how, you know, it's, at least you've started, and then, you know, don't think that this is, you know, this is the end of it. For some people maybe it is, like I think you could get a great deal of benefit even just doing this because it's quite pleasant and it can be quite grounding, get you out, you know, stop the worrying which is unskillful. And then it becomes skillful, obviously, has a good result. Because worry is unskillful. Worry about the terrible things in the world, or you could just be mindfulness of the body. That sets a good example to others, doesn't it? Or I go around worrying and telling everyone all the dreadful news, that becomes a harmful influence. Then I become a papamitta, don't I? I become an evil friend, going and spreading bad news and getting other people worried and upset. Or I become a kalyanamitta, so it becomes my responsibility, isn't it, to cultivate in others what's kusala. Set a good example. You can't do it that by intention, actually. I mean, it's a reflection of what your whole practice. I want you to start moving this voice around. Would you mind doing this? But could you just try thinking that thought's in your chest? Can you move it out of your head, say? Don't know, you have to tell me. But let's say it's in your head, that you're just like Westerners. You had a Western education, and now try and move that thought into your chest. Can you do that? I breathe in, I breathe out. I want you to keep the thoughts if you could. I don't really mind, actually. You can do what you think is suitable, but I'm just trying to encourage you to be mindful of the thought. It's kind of double, really, because it it incorporates your body, really, doesn't it? It's kind of body mindfulness. It's not just... It's what the world needs, isn't it? It needs kalyanamitta. Most of all. Even more than money. It's not a financial real problem. That's not really the problem in the world. The problem is the lack of good influences, lack of kalyanamitta. People often want to solve these problems superficially. Just get the terrorists, put them in jail, and cut their heads off or something, right? Which is actually very akusala kamma. Just trying to solve akusala with akusala. That's usually desperation, isn't it? Or you could put them into jail and be nice to them, just keep them out of harm's way and try and give them an education, a proper education. That's the kind of ideal prison philosophy, isn't it? Sometimes I think it helps people to have a few months in jail, actually. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? But actually I've met people and you realise that often prisoners feel safe and often happy even if the environment is good, and it can actually be a good period of reflection. Sometimes, certainly in England, they've got a kind of gradation of prisons. Some prisons are really you trample on people because you have to put the real rough ones all together and then you put the other ones. So you get a gradation depending on what kind of character you are. It's like kind of various degrees of hell, isn't it? Like the really bad ones go to the worst hell where they fry them and beat them and that. And then there's kind of lesser gradations where it's more in terms of an education. Like the human realm often is a bit like a hell realm, isn't it? It's got like certain aspects which are pretty dreadful, and it's a sort of like it's like a kind of holding cell where you're held, and it becomes quite good for education, really. The human realm, it's quite troublesome and challenging. So it's kind of like you just sort of gently fried here. It's not like a deep fry, the human situation. Maybe at the dentist it becomes closer to the sort of deep fry situation. I don't know if you've ever been in. That dentist drill is quite extraordinary, isn't it? It goes right through your body and it hits. Oh, that's fantastic. I noticed with the sort of the realm, I've noticed that the lower you go, the more aggression there is actually. Like mosquitoes are very aggressive, aren't they? Like, I'm kind of pleased that mosquitoes have got just such small bodies, really, because they're so aggressive. You know, so there's a sort of, as you lose power, it seems, you kind of become more aggressive, doesn't it? Aggression and loss of power. It's quite fortunate, isn't it? Where Brahma gods are very powerful, but they're not. They're the opposite. They're very loving and, you know, full of beneficence. It's just as well, you know. But it sort of would be some concern if it went the other way around, wouldn't it? If the more power you got, the more aggressive. That would be terrible, wouldn't it? Fortunately, it's that way around. So as you lose power, mosquitoes have got very little power. They have it's just a tiny amount of power, but a lot of aggression. And then you go into the kind of preta world and this sort of hell realm. And there's very extreme loss of power and extreme aggression. It's quite nice, funny, isn't it, the way it goes together? It's quite fortunate it's that way around. This is how it is practicing meditation. You've got to practice. The Buddha said it's like practicing satya is like having a bowl full of oil on your head with someone with a sharp knife behind you, and you're trying to weave your way through a kind of party. There's sort of some lovely lady doing something and a full crowd around her, and you're trying to walk mindfully. And this is what I'm doing to you. I'm really testing your ability to do this. I'm sort of seeing, I breathe in, I breathe out. You can't do it, can you? It's too difficult. It's in your chest, but I haven't moved to your stomach yet. You can even move your attention. Can you do that, or is that far beyond you? You'd maybe have to be Chinese. Chinese would find this one very easy. That's what I usually think, actually, once I usually think in my belly. So when it's in my head, it's difficult. Has a different feeling, doesn't it? When thought is in your belly, it feels different, doesn't it? Like in your chest, it's quite nice, isn't it? It's kind of moving thought around. Have you ever done this one before? You move thought around. I've never seen it, maybe. And you can do it incidentally. I don't know if I can do, maybe I'll explain later, but let's just keep with this. So I breathe in your tummy. There's a different feeling, doesn't it? So much you could do with this meditation. I'm just trying to think how many interesting angles you can take on this. Just remember what the Buddha did with it. I want you to notice, like, around thoughts, like as you think, is there what happens when you say I breathe out and then stop thinking? Is it quiet? Is that quiet? I breathe in and then is it quiet? And then you can even see, like, around thought, you see it's quiet, is it? It's worth noting, isn't it? I want you to notice. My teacher told me this actually. It was quite interesting. I practiced mindfulness of breathing for a long time, and then he said something like, I want you to notice the end of the breath. I was so excited, I thought, wow, that's incredible. But it's true, it says a beginning and an ending, doesn't it? The breath. Breathe in, begins, ends. The out-breath, beginning and ending, beginning and ending. It's right there, this lovely reflection on beginning and ending. I found when I was doing this, and I would suggest to you, what I used to take either the out-breath and do it like that, or just the in-breath. So I've argued this through with people, and sometimes they don't agree, but just try, if you take the out-breath, like to look at beginning and ending, and you just take the out-breath, notice the beginning of the out-breath and the end of the out-breath. And then when you breathe out again, you've got a beginning and an ending. I think the problem is that attention it might be to do with, it's just paying attention in a certain way takes a certain, I'm not sure what the reason is, but I found this quite a good way of examining, like impermanence, developing a perception of impermanence. That's what we're doing. Anicca sanya, perception of impermanence, beginning, ending. And if you notice, breath, it doesn't just have a beginning and an ending, it has a bit in between, doesn't it? Could you stop the end? Could you try and stop, could you have a breath that just had a beginning? Could you try and do that? Maybe just try and see, you see that? Sometimes it helps if you even try to have a breath and try and stop it, ending. Isn't it? That's what we all want to do. We want to get born but not to die, isn't it? That's really what we're interested in, is really we want to stop the breath ending. Just keep breathing out and out and out forever and ever, and not have to die, isn't it? That's what we want. Go down to the beach. I have a lovely day on the beach and just wanted to go on forever and ever, not ever have to go back to work, isn't it? It's like have a beginning. Please just go to heaven forever. That's what that's people's idea, is you could just go to heaven forever. You could have a beginning and no ending. But here what you notice, try and stop it then. Try and do that. Try and have this breath. So it's like, the skill then of meditation is to not only notice impermanence, but then to develop a skillful attitude to it, isn't it? You notice it, and then what's the attitude? And one answer to that is to remember this lovely Chula Tanha Samkhya Sutta, where this was venerable. This was when Sakka, his second visit to the Buddha, and he was much more confident at this stage, actually, more kind of buoyant. And he visited and asked the Buddha, how in brief is a monk liberated by the destruction of tanha? And then the Buddha said, here a monk has heard that Sabbe Dhamma Nalang Abhinivesaya, which I attempted to translate, and maybe you can have your own translation, I don't know. I've thought about it again, I'll tell you what my new idea for that is. And then the Buddha said, when a monk has heard this lovely saying, then he knows the whole teaching thoroughly, and he knows it accurately. And then when that happens, then he abides whatever seeing anicca nupassi, viraga nupassi, nirodha nupassi, patinisagga nupassi. But I think that's helpful, isn't it? Like when you see impermanence, and then to remember that all things, what's the word? You can translate it really how you like. I mean, it's a different way. All things should not, I think I said, all things should not be wished for. All things are not for clinging to. All things are not for clinging to. All things are not for clinging to. Okay, you're still doing this. Can you see this impermanent breath Can you remember that? The tendency is to cling to the breath in a way, to claim it or to, without seeing it in the right way. Do you think I'm just talking about the breath? Or am I talking about all things that are impermanent? You understand? Like to learn this lesson from the breath, but we're talking about the universe now, aren't we? We're talking about life, every single aspect of it. The eye is impermanent, visual objects are impermanent, eye consciousness is impermanent, the ear is impermanent, the whole list. Like to learn this lesson with the breath, it would be really a lesson, wouldn't it? Sabbe Dhamma nalam abhinivesaya. Can you do that with the breath? All things are not for grasping. All things are not for clinging to. Do you understand that? Can you see the breath? And remember that lovely saying. I think mothers, when you have lovely children, came down on the train and you can see how attached mothers are to their lovely children. And I think maybe we should teach them this meditation, because there must be a lot of pain, really. Like as children grow up, you can see what direction it's going, can't you? Those children, they're growing up, they're not stopping. Why don't they just stop? Like, usually about 2 is, I find, very charming, that age. 2, they can run around a bit, and it's very, very charming. And children, I think it's part of their survival mechanism is to they've got very big eyes, and they're very slightly clingy. They're very in a nice way. And this must be a lovely age, actually. And then they get to 3, and then 4, and we think, God, why don't they just stop? You kind of start clinging, Just stop, okay, darling, that's it, stop growing, you're 4 forever now. And then they go 15, you think, oh no, 15, that's the worst. Isn't it? You can see it going, you can see the boat slowly sinking, it's turning over. It's like watching the Titanic going down. Something dreadful. But it wouldn't have to be that if you had the right attitude, would you? If you learned this lovely lesson from the breath, beginning and ending, you would realise that children are no different. Your job, your great career, whatever plans you have for yourself, could you have a job that just began and didn't end? You get sort of promoted to the chief executive. Well, that's it. That's me forever. King of the gods, forever and ever. I am Brahma. Look at me. Now look at my car. But that's foolish, isn't it? That's because you forgot your breath for a start. Beginning and ending. And you also forgot the Buddha's teaching to Sakka, king of the gods. She could have said something else. Sakka was quite lucky to get such a nice teaching. But he was a Sotapanna, he was a stream mentor already at this stage. And he was kind of a nice position, actually. He was a Sotapanna, but he was also king of the gods. And also he had that lovely palace full of lovely devatas. It was and he had also just beaten his enemies, the Asuras. It was just incredible position, isn't it? Imagine having all that. I'm a Sotapanna, and I'm king of the gods, and I don't have to live on this brutal earth with terrorists and bombers. Nothing. I go up whenever I want. I just go up to my palace, and it's incredible. I've finished my enemies. It's just everything. I've got everything. And you think, well, that's incredible. That's what I want to be. Do you want to be that? Would you like to be that? Where is Sakka today, do you think? Do you think Sakka's still up there celebrating, as a matter of interest? Or does he got chucked out of the palace by now? Or did he look at his breath and look at beginning and ending? Because it's like in the middle of the breath, remember, like the breath begins and then it has a kind of middle bit, doesn't it? A long kind of period. It's not just a snap, it doesn't just have a beginning and a middle and an end like that. It's kind of like a gradation. It's like watching a ship sinking. It's goes through a whole series of phases. It sort of gradually rolls over very slowly and just keeps going in the same direction. Actually, it goes usually in the films. It goes down nose first or something, or the back goes. Probably the engine. The engine probably goes down first. It probably goes backwards. It goes slowly, and you can't stop it. It's unstoppable, and then it goes and then finish. And the breath's like that. Every aspect of it's heading towards the end, isn't it? Every moment of it, the whole thing it's a movement towards the ending, isn't it? If you take the out-breath, it's movement towards ending. So every aspect of it is not for clinging. It is not for clinging. It is not for clinging to. It is not for grasping. That's the point. That's the main thing that the Buddha said. It's not for whatever it is, not just the breath actually, for your children, for your job, for your lovely hair, whatever you're proud of, especially what you like really, but it's also what you don't like. Sometimes people get like into analysis. They think we have to analyse the situation about what metal the Titanic was made of, something like that, and you go into analysis and all the time trying to stop it actually. I think that's what analysis is about. It's about trying to get it so it didn't sink, and so my hair doesn't, it's beautiful forever, and my children stop growing up. I've analysed childhood and just, but whereas the Buddha's not, this is the opposite. It's simply, whatever it is, not analysis, it's just see, this is not for grasping, this is not for clinging to. That's the main thing about it. Whatever it is, whether you understand it, some of it you understand, a lot of things we don't understand really, like about breathing. You become a doctor, you could study the whole biochemistry of breathing. It's like a kind of tunnel, it's an endless tunnel, isn't it? The tunnel of knowledge. You first of all get the anatomy of the chest and then the lungs, and then you study the biochemistry and all of that, and it just keeps going, and you think, well, I know, practically, then you go into the library and look up respiratory medicine magazines, and you just realise that this goes on forever. Information, that's just about the chest, just about breathing. So it's, the Buddha, he said, no, this teaching is a handful of leaves. So it's just as well. I mean, we haven't got long to learn this. So if you just had one thing to learn, that would be very helpful, wouldn't it? If you just learn Sabbe Dala Dhamma Nalang Abhinivesaya, all things are not for clinging to. That's an incredible lesson, isn't it? Just think how much suffering you could be freed of. Just remember that as you breathe out. That's the point about it. It's not, you could analyse the temperature of the air, the carbon dioxide, and analyse it, which is a bit painful, isn't it? But you could do it, and some people do that. It's their job. But for meditators, the main thing is just to remember this lovely, you get the attitude to impermanence correct. Not just the breath, but your own body, decaying body, and then it's fraught, isn't it? Fraught with danger, the possibilities of accidents and death. It's quite intimidating. Or the asubha, the meditation on unloveliness. Why do we do that as a meditation? What's the purpose? To make ourselves depressed? Or is it just to release the grasping at it? To remember all the time, all things are not for clinging to. Now you can do that. I've given you quite a few lovely things to remember when you're in the traffic jam. You've got your breathing, you've got all beings must not be harmed. When someone cuts in on you, sometimes the end of the day can be quite, it's also a very good reminder in a way. It's a kind of like a marker of time in a way. That's the day finished now. It's night now, evening, night. It's the end of the day. And that can be quite charming in a way, but if you remember what that means that the day is over, isn't it? It's that, the day that we woke up to this morning, looked forward to and thought, and then had many expectations on, and then there's the end. Each day, each year, each month, each year. And it's, you can celebrate it, but what does the significance of it can be quite shocking, really, and what's the word? Thought-provoking in a way. And so, just to remember this lovely reflection, all things are not for clinging to. Even the words, even that sentence, if you said it in your mind, all things are not, what's the word? All things are not for clinging to. Even that you can't cling to, can you? Even that sentence you can't stop. It has a beginning and an ending. Thought itself. that very reflection is not for clinging to, it's not for grasping, isn't it? And then what? What's the consequence? What's the outcome of that? What's the next step beyond that? Like when you've seen this, or as in the practice of that, what's your next duty? When you see this, all things are not for grasping, all things are not for clinging to. What's the next step for you? What's the next step? But it's part of the path, isn't it? It's part of the Eightfold Path. But to continue with that's just one aspect of the path. But the path is one of cultivating what's wholesome and abandoning what's unwholesome, isn't it? That's what the life's about, isn't it? I'm not saying this is the whole of the practice. It's part of the practice. But you've got the dana, the offerings. You've got the sila, samadhi, panya. You've got the whole aspect of it, and to balance things correctly. I mean, I think it's one of the skills really of the path is to balance your practice. It's not like giving can be very joyous and lovely, can't it? It's a lovely part of the path, offering not just food or something, but offering your time, your thought to people is very joyful and supportive of practice. I think if you just did panya, it might be quite gloomy even, remember. But it's like remembering the Buddha is sada, isn't it? Faith in the Buddha. It's usually balanced with panya, but faith is very beautiful. Remember the Buddha's life, but you've got the sila. Remember I did that first talk on metta bhavana, which is also very enjoyable and comprehensive. May you be well, may you be well, may we be well, may we be well. This is all cultivating what's wholesome, what's skillful, what's kusala. But in the context of panya, it's all the time remembering all things are not for clinging to. But that doesn't mean that you don't have nothing to do, because there's still the duties to fulfill, isn't there? There's the path to develop, and there's effort, there's energy to apply ourselves to continuously cultivate what's wholesome in different ways. And remember that the Buddha recommended wide knowledge of the scriptures. I think it's not for everyone, and for some people that's not what they need to hear, admittedly, but in general, to find out about the Buddha's teaching and apply it, and find out what works for you, what brings you happiness and joy, and look for ways to overcome what's painful and difficult. And look for opportunities to learn these kind of lessons, to see pain as an opportunity to learn, to have a positive attitude to it. You see, to welcome the opportunity to learn is a very good attitude for students. So there's a lot, isn't there? There's a lot to encompass that. But we're going to do a chant for you. Now you also get a blessing chant. Venerable Method of myself. Sambitiyo viva jantu sambarugo nasatu mate bhavadvantarayo sukhi dikayuto nava abhivadanasi nityang buddha pachayino chattaro dhammaravadam kivayuvano sukham bhalam bhantu sambhamandaram Sambhavena Saddha Suti Bhavantu Te Bhavantu Sabba Mangalam Pandu Sabba Devada Sabba Dhamma Saddha Suti Bhavantu Te Bhavantu Sabba Mangalam Rakandu Sabba Devada